I love that.
Mm-hmm.
That's a really good one. Good for grounding. I'm recording already.
Perfect. We entered the time portal, baby, where it just time is
Yeah.
illusory, it doesn't exist.
Welcome to Openly Spoken, the podcast to help you show up, speak out, and be seen within your relationships, your work, and most importantly, with the relationship with yourself. In this podcast, we talk about all things self-love, relationships, sexuality, spirituality, and more. Hi, I'm your host, Celia Antonio, and I'm a women's sexuality and self-love coach, a mindfulness expert, and your cheerleader for your most grounded and expansive self-expression. You can connect with me on Instagram at self-expressedbabe, and for all of my guest episodes, there will always be links in the show notes so that you can find them online. I give my deepest thanks to you for being here and spending your precious time with me today. Now let's begin our journey. Yay! Welcome. We're recording.
Thank you. Hello.
Welcome to Openly Spoken. Today's guest, I'm just going to introduce Amber K today. So Amber holds space for women to alchemize the good girl conditioning through somatic healing and mentorship into queen energy so that they can experience fulfilling relationships, better sex, and more pleasure in their daily lives. Amber's been a guide for 7 years, hosting retreats and coaching spaces for women to reconnect with themselves and heal experiences related to their sensuality and sexual expression. And she utilizes tools like the yoni egg, breath work, somatics, Reiki Theta, NLP, human design, EFT tapping, all working towards the mission of women tapping into their body's wisdom so that they can live fully and in their divine essence. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for that beautiful introduction.
Yeah, you're welcome. Well, technically, you provided it to me.
True. That's true.
Is there anything you want to add of like telling us about who you are and just kind of like introducing yourself in your own words?
Great question. It's always hard for me to bring it succinctly down. It's like the seeing it in yourself, right? Unless you're like actually writing it down. Um, but yeah, I think a lot of things that have really come to me recently is that I'm really like moving towards working with um, obviously the same things that you just mentioned. Um, just wanting to work more with women who are in like that leadership space, and that the women who are like going and they're like burning out because they're trying to do it all and have it all and forgetting to come back to their bodies. And I've been seeing that a lot in different women that I know and different things that I've seen. And so I'm really desiring to help women that are in that space to really come back and remember like, oh, it's okay to take time for me and myself, and like remember my pleasure and my sensuality and what feels good every day. And so that's something that I am currently creating, which I'm super excited about.
I love that. Especially because I think that's so relatable because typically in leadership spaces, like in the past, it's been more dominated by testosterone-based bodies who aren't cyclical, like estrogen and progesterone-based bodies, or like women or however you want to.
Yeah.
I want to say it in the most inclusive way, so I'm kind of like,
Yeah.
but you know what I mean.
Yes, I totally get what you mean. And I love that you're so aware of that, because I'm like, sometimes I'm like, it's hard because you're like so used to talking a certain way. And then,
Yeah.
all these different things are coming in and you're like, oh, I want to like make sure, yeah, speaking to and being inclusive with all of that. So I love that you did that.
Thank you. Yeah, it's also like hard to remember that and invite that in when you are talking about topics like sexuality, for example, because there's that like, masculine, feminine energy, polarity. There's like those like two opposing sides. And yeah, it can be easy to, I guess, pigeonhole people. I don't know. But
I hear
moving
you.
on.
That's a whole other topic.
Yeah. Yeah. So I know we want to talk about rituals today and pleasure rituals and things about sensuality. Um, I would first like to ask, and it's related to our topic, as I was reading through your bio before our call, a question came up for me to ask you that I'm so curious to know your perspective about. I would love to know what you define as the difference between sensuality and sexuality.
Hmm. That's a great question. And one that I very frequently come to is for me personally, because I feel like everybody has their different definition. So, speaking for myself, I feel like with sensuality, it's in everything. I feel like you can
Mm,
find it everywhere, presently. Like, say you're going on a walk through the mountains and you're just so tapped into all of your senses and what you're experiencing around you. That to me is very sensual. And doing that in everyday life too, like walking through your house, like what are you doing? Are you doing the dishes? And how can you find the sensuality in that and tapping into the senses and how that feels in your body? I feel like definitely it's such a close relation. But to me, I look at sexuality more of like the exploration, like different kinks or different like what do you you enjoy uh, sexually, like when you're being intimate with someone else. Like to me, there's a lot of that, and I feel like that can also be applied again to every day. It's not like you have to go out and be like, oh, look at me. And like, I'm like totally just like open for sexual connection. I think it's more like also just innately we are sexual and sensual beings. And so I feel like there's such a
hmm
cohesiveness and they intertwine together. And it's just what that looks like or feels like to you without the conditioning and the shame on top of it. Um,
Yeah.
and so, yeah, that's how I define it. I know like I keep finding different pieces that also relate to them as I go, where I'm like, ooh, this feels sensual to me, or like, ooh, this is where I would put like it in my sexuality topic, or something that I would say in those areas. But a lot of times I find that they just like end up coming back into the same place and start to have the conversation in a similar way because they both kind of come in just naturally. So
hmm
it's always hard for me to define both, but yeah, that's where I'm at right now.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
it sounds like with sensuality, you're tapping into all your senses. And then with
Mm.
sexuality, there's still the sense of like tapping into senses, but it's like specific to, I guess, what turns you on or what you derive pleasure from. There's also a sense of like exploration from it.
Yeah, for me at least, like, yeah, I really do feel like that. It's like this exploration piece. Like when I think of my sexuality, I'm like, what do I want to experience sexually that maybe I've been hiding from or I'm nervous
Mm,
about or that I'm so freaking curious about that I haven't really gone into. And so I tend to think of that more as sexuality. Because also even sensuality, there's so much pleasure in that, but it doesn't always
yeah.
necessarily mean I want to go have sex right now. It's like I just want
hmm
to experience this pleasure in my body. So yeah, there's the difference there for me for sure.
Yeah. That's such
Yeah.
an interesting thing to contemplate on.
Yeah.
Because as you dive into your senses more, like that can open up more sexuality. And like as you deepen your sexuality, your sensuality can deepen. Like they really are super intertwined. And
Yeah.
I don't think you can have one without the other.
Yeah. Yes, they're so, so, so intertwined because I feel like I, there are times where I'm feeling so sensual and like totally in my body. And it's just like this yummy feeling that I want to carry through my day. And other times I'm like so tapped in my sensuality and I'm like, I am ready for some connection. So, so it really just depends on the day, on the mood, on the cycles, like you were mentioning before, like cyclical periods. Like there are times where I just want that for myself, and it's not always an end game either. Of like, oh, I think a question I get asked a lot, or people have concerns about when I'm talking about sensuality. I've had
Hmm.
people bring up like, oh, but does this mean I'm going to have to be like super sexual and like do these things? And what are we going to be doing at this like event or experience? And I'm like, ooh, there are so many people that still think sensuality means like they're doing all these like really intimate things in these settings. And I'm like, okay, so how can I then help people see more like where this piece comes in and that it is just naturally them, but it's being shut down because they're so afraid that it means something different. And so yeah, even with the sensuality, it's like there are times where you can just sit and like I could be sitting here right here on this podcast. I'm so present in my body. I'm like really enjoying the conversation. I'm feeling all of my senses connected to this place. And it's just like this yummy, pleasure filled feeling without an
Yeah.
end goal of like climax. You know what I mean? It's like this
Yeah.
beautiful just experience, and that's what it is.
Hmm.
So I think a lot of people look for the end goal or where am I going next instead of just enjoying what's happening in their body right now. And that's very sensual to me.
Yeah. I love that. That is interesting how some people think that the words are the same thing. Like
Hmm.
you mentioned, if you have an event that is like a sensuality event, that people think they're going to do sexual things or intimate
Hmm.
things. And
Yes.
yeah, that's an important, like, I guess, piece of education for people
Mhm.
to take on and learn.
Yes, absolutely. It's a lot
Especially,
more than
oh,
you
go
think it
ahead.
would be. No, I was gonna
Yeah,
say, yeah, it's just it comes up a lot more than you think it would when you've been in the space for so long, and then you hear people say it, and you're like, oh wow, there are still so many people that don't see or understand the difference because of the conditioning or whatever they've
yeah,
experienced. So it's very important for sure.
yeah. And I was going to say, I think it's especially important because of like how fast paced modern life is. And there's just this kind of like inevitable stress and anxiety that comes from that. But when we're able to tune into all of our senses, and like you said, when you mentioned that, you're here on this podcast, you're feeling into your body, like it sounds like a deep presence to me, the way you
Hmm.
explained it. And that's something we need more of. We definitely need to change what is causing the stress and anxiety, because, all the things we do to deal with that is really just like a band-aid on top, in my opinion.
Yeah.
So, I'm curious, what were like the first rituals that you were exposed to that changed your, well, actually, maybe tracking back further than that, like before that, when did you make this distinction of sensuality and sexuality, and how was maybe your relationship to these two things in the past? And
Hmm.
I'm asking you like a fourth question. I always do this on the podcast. I'll be like, five questions all at once.
I'll try to remember.
But I kind of essentially, I'm curious about like your story of like how you started, how the relationship with sexuality and sensuality was, and like what that pivotal point was
Yeah.
to have you be able to offer the type of work that you offer now.
Yeah, so my experience with it, I'm kind of like going a little timeline here, but when I was younger, I grew up religious. So much love for the religion I grew up in, had beautiful experiences, um, and like I haven't been part of it for a long time, uh, but it was just a lot of the conditioning and the teachings of shame around sexuality and that you only do it when you're married. You can't do anything unless you're married. Or one of the things one person told me one time was, oh, well, even if you're not in the mood, you need to do it anyway because it's your duty to your husband. Like all
Mm.
of these things that are piled on top of what that is, it doesn't make it exciting. It makes it like, so basically I'm just here for someone else. Like it's
Yeah.
not like I can't be curious about my own. And so, and I remember like growing up, I was very sexual being, like very, and I could feel that in my body because I was always so curious about things, but I wouldn't let that out. And I was terrified to talk about it because I didn't want to get in trouble. And so then I would just like, in secret, like I would have my Barbie dolls and be so curious about like Barbie and Ken making out, like, like
I
and so
love
like
that. I
these
used to do that too.
right? These different things where you're like, "Ooh, what's this or what's that?" And so you
Yeah.
get curious and um I think for a long time those were things I would be nervous about admitting, like, "Oh, I'm not
Yeah.
doing that. Like I'm this good girl and I'm good and I'm perfect." And I'm like the
Mm.
the example. And so, yeah, I really held a lot of that back. And even in high school, you know how things start coming up more, people are joking about stuff and, are talking about things that they've done. And so I would participate in the conversations, but like kind of laugh it off like a joke, like, haha, just kidding. Like, I don't think about that stuff. It's like, it's like letting it out, but in a way that's like, but that's not real. Like, I'm just like, I'm naive and I don't know these things. And so that was a huge part of growing up in my relationship to sexuality. I didn't even know what sensuality was back then.
Hmm.
Um, and then it wasn't until, let's see, um, well, I had my first I lost my virginity, not lost. I had sex for the first time, and I was not
Love that.
married.
Love that
Right?
mindfulness of the words. Yeah, we don't
Yes.
lose anything.
Did not lose it. My experience was. And so, and it was for a reason that I never thought I would ever do. And it was
Hmm.
something I had like not like I would think of other women like, I can't believe they do that just to keep someone around. Like, how could you do that? And then I ended
Hmm.
up doing the same thing. Okay.
Mm.
So it was like this whole thing, whole experience, lots of guilt, lots of pain came from that experience and what happened there. And so there was just these times where I didn't really have anybody to talk to about it unless it was like girls' nights and we're just like being silly and joking about stuff. Didn't really have a lot of knowledge around those things. And so then I got married, still didn't have a good relationship with sexuality, kind of became more of like, oh, it's a chore, it's not fun, um, which was really sad because
Yeah.
I wanted that connection with my husband. I didn't want to feel that way. And so I kept thinking there was something wrong with me. And then fast forward, uh, I had my oldest with my previous marriage. We ended up getting separated when he was about 2, and that's when I really started before we got separated, I started my journey. Like I went to this event, really started learning about self-love and stepping into that arena and started
Hmm.
really saying yes to myself more. And this was the beginning of really cultivating that relationship with myself. And then a little while later, me and my spouse were separated. Um, and then fast forward, I met my husband now. We've been together since 2017. We just barely got married last year, but through my whole relationship with him, it's been this healing process where I was starting to be more in touch with my sexuality and be more open. And I felt very held in that space. And it was something where I created that safety for myself first.
Mm.
And and it was beautiful. And I'm a very flirty person by nature. Like I love to flirt. And so I really started embracing that more and being in receiving mode more. And I feel like just naturally, like 2017 to 2019 was this whole shift for me of really stepping more into that and like being more open about what I wanted sexually, being more open with my flirtatiousness and really um I'm someone who always very much enjoys the moments, but I noticed I was going fast paced because I needed to get things done and like go to the next thing. And I wasn't taking time to like stop and
Mm.
um, enjoy and celebrate. And so that's when I started recognizing, like, oh, this feels different. This feels like good and yummy to me. And I still didn't really have a word for it. And then, yeah, a little bit into that, I realized I'm like, oh, this is like sensuality. Like that's what this is, you know? And so that's where I started to really bring in my own definitions and my own experiences. And so, yeah, between those time frames, 2017 and 2019, is when that really started coming into play even more. And from there, it's just expanded so much. And I'm so much more open with myself and my partner and the people in my life. And I never, if you would have said to me even 2 years ago, like, oh, we're going to be teaching about sexuality and sensuality and like really tapping into that, I would have been like, yeah, whatever. Like, that's not, like, well, that's cool. You know, it's something I never really imagined myself doing, but it's something that's so innately me and it's who
Yeah.
I
Oh, that's
am. And that's,
interesting.
yeah, it's so cool how it came into play because then like even all of these different tools I learned, like human design and things, it's like in my human design, it literally talks about like I am like the embodiment of like sexuality and sensuality. And I'm like, okay. So I'm like, okay, so all these things are just falling into place where it makes sense because sometimes that's how it happens, right? Like growing up, like this was one of the biggest trials in my life was the shame around these parts of me and ends up being the things I love expressing the most and I love talking the
Mm,
most about. And so it's just been a beautiful journey for me. And obviously there were very, very hard times, very heartbreaking times, very scary times of what am I doing? Am I doing the right thing? Am I sinning? Like what's going to
mm,
happen to me? But really, it's like the most joyful I've been is being able to tap into those parts of me and express that in the rest of my life and how it's shifted my relationships, being a mom, like all of these different things that have benefited from me being even a little bit open in the beginning to exploring those things more. So,
yeah.
yeah.
Wow. I am so happy for you.
Thank you.
Because I think that's a very important transformation in a woman's life to move away from this narrative of like my body is here for someone else,
Mhm.
or even moving away from like what's allowed in sexuality
Yeah.
in regards to like a religion giving you the rules, and then you just kind of, I guess, when you're born into a family that has a religion, you didn't choose that religion.
Mhm.
And then those rules are just kind of like rules that are put on you, which is
Mhm.
different from like, when you're older, you're like, I'm going to practice this religion and these are the rules. All right, I'm fine with it. Like if
Mhm.
it resonates with you, that's okay. But if it's something that's like suppressing your own self-love, like you said, you started journeying into the realm of self-love and learning what that is for the first time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And so important to remember too, like the biggest question I always ask myself with the sexuality, like in my partnerships, the what's wrong with me question. That's such a big
Mm,
thing. I feel like so many women, like even if they don't admit it out loud, they're judging themselves or comparing themselves based on what they've seen or heard. And we're all different. We all experience things
yeah.
differently. And that's something, even when me and my now husband got together, that was something that was huge for me because I was like, is he really going to want to be with me? Like, I'm not experiencing these areas. Like, I don't look like this or sound like this or experiment like this, especially at the beginning of that journey for me. And so that was something very powerful that really helped me to open more was remembering, wait, I'm not the same as that person. I don't have to like that. I don't have to look like that or sound like that or be like that. I get to express how I want to express and letting go of that comparison and those judgments and those fears of not doing it right.
Mm,
Because there's not a right way. It's what
Yeah.
is it that you're wanting to express and feel and experience. And that's something that I feel like is so important to really get out there into in the world and reminding people of is there's nothing wrong with you. You just do
Yeah.
it differently. So, yeah.
Yeah. I think that's a really big key piece
Mhm.
because in the realm of sexuality, we're typically only offered one option of like, usually it's like monogamous, wait till you're married. Like, that's like the most common one. Um, but you might have read the book that we had to read in our training. What was that book called? Something with dawn, the word dawn in it. Do you know what book I'm talking about?
Sex at Dawn?
Sex at Dawn.
Yeah.
Yes. Did you read that
Yeah.
book yet?
I have not read it yet.
Okay. So the cliff notes of this book, like it's basically presenting to you how sexuality is approached and practiced across the
Mhm.
world and how it's different everywhere. Like
Mm.
there's some tribes in I don't want to say a country because I don't remember the exact country, so I don't want to put wrong information out there, but there are some tribes who like when certain tribe members turn like 15 or 16 or something like that, they get their own like little hut with like a door that goes out to like one door that goes into the community and one door that goes out to, not the community so that they can be encouraged to have multiple sexual partners because they're young and they need to learn and explore their sexuality. That's just
Mm.
one example of the like many examples in that book that shows you like all the all the diversity that exists
Mm.
within sexuality. Like for some
Yeah.
people it resonates to be polyamorous. For some people, like even sexual orientation, like some people are attracted to women, some people are attracted to men, some people decide to um like there's just so many different
There are.
there's a vast difference, but we're just given when we're just example, like it's no wonder that we'll be asking ourselves what's wrong with me because
Mhm.
we're all forced into the same box. And like you
Mhm.
said before, we're all so different. So we're not all going to fit in that box.
Yeah, exactly. And it makes me so sad to know that so many of us, the majority of the world, I would think, um, feel that way. Like
Yeah.
that we have such a one way of thinking that's shown most of the time, as you were sharing, that we just we're not really living because we're afraid we're gonna upset someone or go outside the box and do something different. And so then we just repress ourselves and then start to create this terrible relationships within ourselves because
Yeah.
we're denying how we are truly feeling and what we truly want to please other people.
Yeah.
And it's just it sucks. Like that's such a crappy feeling and like it sucks that that is what is put out there so much. And so I feel like that's what's so important about the work that me and you and so many other people do in this world to like really remind people to come back to themselves so that they can
Yeah.
live life to what makes them happy, and not living for others.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I love how you explain it as or describe it as you're coming back to yourself, you're coming back
Yeah.
home because
Yeah.
that for me illustrates like a point of like origin, like here's where you begin and here's where home is, which to
Mhm.
me this is kind of like I guess metaphorically related to sexuality because we all come from that, like we all exist because two people had sex
Yeah.
or there was artificial insemination, which I guess could be a form of synthetic sex. I don't know what you would what you would call that, but like we all come from this thing, that this like experience of two people coming together, and that same experience is so commonly, at least in, the part of the world we're in, labeled as this bad, shameful thing. So how can there be space for self-love when the very origin of like where you come from is considered wrong or dirty or shameful or bad?
I love the way you said that. That was beautifully said and brought together. Because yeah, like the relation you made to that of like how can we experience self-love when the very thing we come from is shamed? That should be a quote. Like like for real. That is beautiful. And just yeah, how you brought that all into culmination there because it's true. Like same thing with, okay, no sex before marriage. You can't have sex before marriage. Don't do it. Don't do it. And then you get married. You're like, okay, go ahead.
And it's
Like,
like
now
you
you're
don't know
free to
what
do
you're
it.
doing. It's like, how do I do it?
You're like, wait. But then just because someone tells you, oh, it's okay to do it now, but you still have all of these things that are like,
Yeah.
but
All this
wait.
fear in the body, and like, yeah, your body isn't able to open to it because you're so used to it being wrong and bad.
Yes. Yes. That's exactly how I was too. I was like, oh, but I should not be doing this, but I'm doing it, but I shouldn't be. And like the judgment and the shame and like all of these things are happening inside of you. And yeah, all of the conditioning, the thoughts, like every wiring that we have of what relates to sexuality, sex, all of that is like okay, now all of my wires are going crazy because all of a sudden I'm thrown into this place. And like if you're someone who's been like blessed enough and had an experience where growing up you had these open conversations and so you were aware of it and it was more of like I do with my children. I have open conversation with them. If they're curious about something, I will talk to them as it's appropriate for their age,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like I will feel into okay, are they ready to talk about this or should I just share this piece? And because I would rather them come to me then go search it out somewhere else and I know they're probably still going to have stories, they're probably still going to have these things that happen because we all do. um but it is my intention and I do my best to be able to be open with my children so that they don't grow up having this shame around it and again worldly, hopefully that shifts,
Yeah.
um but like doing our best in our own homes to have those open conversations and not create shame around it. Like even there was once where my son who's 9 now, when he was 5, he asked me a question about where babies come from and I didn't go be like laugh ha 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 or no you shouldn't know that right now. Like I didn't like shut it out. I looked at him and I was like, and I knew I needed a minute, right? Because I'm like, how do I explain this to him? So I'm
Yeah.
like, you know what, that's a great question. I'm going to step out for a minute so I can think about it so I can come back and give you a good answer or an answer that
I
that
love
you know,
that.
something. And so I can't remember exactly the words, but something like that. And so then I was able to come back composed and talk
Hmm.
about it so that he doesn't feel like one, I'm laughing at him because kids interpret things very different. Like you could laugh like,
Yeah.
oh, that's so funny. And then they're going to think you're laughing at them. Right.
Hmm.
And so their perception and interpretation of things is so different than how we perceive things as adults, even most of the time. And so things that we think they're like, oh, they don't get it or whatever, they'll understand this sarcasm or this comment I make. No, they don't. They just don't get it the same. And so being able to compose yourself and take a minute to be able to come back and have that conversation with them, that's going to help them know that it's safe to come talk to them about things, talk to you about things in the future when things
Mm.
are a lot bigger questions and it is going to be more detailed and these different things. They know that they can come to you with that and you're not going to laugh it off or like make them feel silly or dumb about it. And then they're going to go talk to their friends about it or search online and find all these other things that probably aren't very helpful. And
Yeah.
so like I wish I would have had that growing up. I know my parents did their best. And you know, it was kind of that like, haha, that's funny, or like, you know, things like that.
Yeah.
And so nothing bad on them because that's what they knew. But that's something that I've always known with my kids. I'm like, I want those conversations to happen in a loving and safe container so that as they grow up, they know they have that space with me. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. I love that. In my opinion, in doing that, I think that's like so underrated and
Mm,
underappreciated in our society because you're doing a service to society, in my opinion. Because
yeah.
just like how we tied knowing just how we just tied sexuality to the self-love piece, there's also a really big piece of self-love where if a child knows that their parent is a safe space and is like home,
Mhm.
that solid foundation helps you love yourself as well, and all of these things, when they go out into the world and interact and have relationships, and whether it's romantic friendships or work colleagues, whatever it is, they're able to treat people with more love and respect because they have love and respect for themselves first. So you're doing
Yeah.
a service and it's much appreciated.
Well, thank you. I know I went up on a tangent there, but it popped in my head and I'm like, oh, I'm going to share this because I don't think enough people talk about it.
Yeah, no, I love that you shared it.
Okay, good.
Love it. So, something that seemed to be like a common theme from where you started to where you are now, and even like the work you do of like helping women alchemize this like good girl narrative into being like, I'm a queen.
Mhm.
A common theme seems to be shame.
Mm,
And we wanted to talk about rituals. And I'm
mm.
curious if you have a ritual that you like to go to for shame that you would like to share with the listeners today.
Yeah, that's a good question.
Maybe
Let me
also,
feel that.
even, I don't know if we should share what is a ritual. What does that
Mm,
mean to you, the word ritual?
yeah, ritual to me, I feel like again, it is your own definition. Like, what's something that is time for yourself? Um, where, for example, I could when I first started. So let's start there because if you've never done a ritual before, if you've never done anything like this before, something that I started doing, and I didn't realize it was a ritual at the time, but I made sure, like at least for 5 minutes a day, I went into a space that was just my own. It was only for me. I got to go there. I got to have that peace and quiet for at least 5 minutes. Everybody has 5 minutes. Okay. Let me just say that because about conversation be like, I don't have time. I don't have time. I'm like,
Yeah.
you can make time though. Like everyone can do this.
Yeah.
And so
And just
I would
reminding
have,
everyone that Amber is a mom of
yeah,
two. And she's saying everyone
yes,
has 5 minutes as a mom of two.
yes. Everyone has 5 minutes. Like even if you have to hide in your closet, I've done that. Okay. I will admit that I've hid in the closet. I've hid in the bathroom. I've like hid in the garage. Like there's, you could do it. So just having this space where putting it in your calendar where you go 5 minutes, I would take those 5 minutes and I would just sit by myself. I wouldn't be on my phone. I wasn't distracted by anything else. I wasn't reading. Like you could read as a ritual too. Like that's totally could be your ritual. But for me, it was just sitting by myself in silence. So I could
Mhm.
just let everything move and let myself just settle because there was so much going on all the time. And at that time, when I started doing this, my oldest was 2 or 3.
Mhm.
And so it's a little harder, right? They want to follow you everywhere. They want to do all the things. And so it was just that little bit of time, though, set my days up so much better, even if I had to wake up earlier.
Mm.
And so, like, starting like that or staying up a little later. How important is it to you to have this space that you can take for yourself to do something that just feels good to you? That's what to me is a ritual. It's something every day that you do for yourself. And you take the time and you set it aside and you're present in that moment and you're not scrolling on your phone. It's not a phone ritual. Your phone goes away for this, okay? But other things, no TV, like nothing like that, like reading or meditating or just sitting in silence or looking at the stars, or maybe it's super early in the morning and you want to drink some cacao or some tea or water or coffee or whatever it is, and you just have that time to yourself. That is very ritualistic to me. It's something that just makes you feel really good and set your day up for success because you've had that time without going into fires everywhere mode where everything has to be done. And so you're just on go, go, go. And that's how you've started your day. And so your day is all set up when you start that way, where you're just like wake up to your alarm and you're on the go. You set your day up for
Mm,
for stress. That if you get up to your gentle playing alarm and you do something for you, and then the rest of your day, it feels like, yeah, you might have stressful moments. You might have moments where you have to move a little faster, but you've started your day slower. And so your body is set up to be able to handle and set your nervous system up for success.
mm,
Um, so yeah, to me, that's what was really beneficial to me. And of course, just over time, I added things to my ritual. So
yeah.
then I made them a little bit longer, and would the first year, I think it was just meditation that I did. Um, then I started adding in like moving meditation, where I'm just like, I put myself into a meditative state, but I was like moving and doing things within that place. That works better for me sometimes than just sitting still. So you
Mm,
just find what works for you. Dancing. I love dancing and moving, and to certain songs too. So as it relates to like a shame ritual, there's playlists I have for everything. There's
oh,
playlists I have for
nice.
pleasure, playlists I have for anger, playlists I have for frustration, playlists I have for shame, playlists I have for playfulness, like all kinds of things. So I'll just go into my Spotify, pick the playlist of what I'm feeling and or want to feel, and then I just move my body to that and close my eyes and allow my body to lead the way. So that's something I feel like has been my favorite thing to do. So if you're going to start with anything, again, at least that 5 minutes. But if it's something like moving through shame with your sexuality, maybe you put on a song that makes you feel really beautiful, really good in your body, and maybe it's a little bit sexual and like it turns you on, but you're afraid to admit that. Put that song on and move your body, allow your body to move. You're going to start alchemizing those feelings and those emotions that are tied to that, and allowing yourself to move with that like sensual, sexy pleasure feeling. And it's your body just knows what to do with that. And so that's a really beautiful process.
Mm, I love that. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, welcome.
I'm curious also to know because we didn't touch on pleasure too much. Um, but I'm curious to know because it sounds like within your journey there wasn't really space for pleasure to exist within sexuality. So I'm curious to
Mhm.
know when that did start opening up. What do you think that shifted or opened for you?
Yeah. At first, funny enough, it was like high school times, those makeouts that are a little bit more intense. And they're like not allowed.
Yeah,
That was very pleasurable for me,
those
but
were
I
the
didn't want to have
best.
sex, right? It was like, yeah, those were the best. It was like you're
Yeah.
like you didn't want to, like, I didn't ever want to go further than that because like I had that feeling of like, oh, that would be bad, but I let
Hmm.
myself go as far as I could that felt really good in my body, and then just like left it at that. And so I was like training my body like, oh, this feels good enough. This feels very pleasurable and fantastic. I don't need to go any further than that.
Yeah.
And so even within that, I started creating my own conditioning, right? Of like, I'm not going to go further because it's not going to feel as good, and then I'm going to feel bad.
Mm.
Um,
Yeah.
and so it wasn't until, I mean, honestly, even with my previous spouse, the makeouts before we got married were fantastic. And then after we got married and was like, oh, we're going to have sex now, is when I started closing down.
Because you knew what was
And
coming next.
hmm I
Yeah.
would be like, "Oh, okay, I'm good now. Like we're done." And
Yeah.
I felt so much guilt for that. Like towards him, I felt so bad and so guilty. And he never made me feel that way, but it was my own things, right? And felt so much like shame to myself and judgment of myself. And then um, after we got separated, we had like some fun encounters that were great. Again, it was like this connection to like, oh, it's not allowed, so it makes it
Yeah.
fun and
Yeah.
exciting,
Yeah.
right? And then then when I started dating my now spouse, I'm not exactly sure what happened in the moment of meeting him. Like I was very resistant at first, and he was very persistent and like definitely won me over,
Hmm.
obviously, but like um he is the first time I've ever dated someone that I've slept with within the first week of knowing them. And I feel like at the time, the part of it was like, fine, I'm just going to disconnect and have sex. But also, like, on the inside, I feel like I knew like he was the one I wanted to connect with in that way.
Hmm.
And so we did. And a lot. And it was the like that was the first time for me where I was like actually initiating, like excited about it. And so I feel like I know that the journey from where I was of like creating that self-love and paying more attention to me and what I needed and saying yes to myself definitely opened the pathways to that as well, because it's like, oh, I'm choosing this. This is
Yeah.
something that is for me. It's not something that's coming because of marriage. It's not something that's coming because someone tells me, oh, it's okay now. It was like that was a me decision. And
Hmm.
that really opened the floodgates for me. And I started really expressing. And it was beautiful. And that I feel like is still 1000% the catalyst for me, was that starting to choose myself.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, now it's like, I mean, it gets better and better every every year.
Yeah.
um, but yeah, that was a huge turning point for me, was that piece. Yeah.
I love how you shared it in that way of like it was just, you choosing to love yourself and that opened up the gates to that because I feel like usually on podcasts when people are asked questions like that of like when did pleasure open up for you or when did you start your business or whatever question it is, sometimes there's this the answer of and there's no shame in this answer, but sometimes there's an answer of like I did this and that and it's like
Mm,
step by step and formulated. And
mm.
as a listener or someone who's sitting down and learning or and wanting that, when we take on this like oh I got to do this and that actually can create more closing. And yeah.
Yeah. I'm so glad you shared that, because honestly, I will tell you, anytime someone ever asks me like what made shifts for me, that's literally the key point in all of the shifts I've made in my life, was that moment where I started choosing myself and
Hmm.
having more self-love for myself. And sometimes there have been times where I'm like, well, that's not going to be a good enough answer because it's not like it doesn't sound hard enough, right? And so I'm just like, but it's true. Like I just made that choice and stayed consistent with it. And it wasn't freaking easy. It was hard because I was a yes person and
Yeah.
all growing up. And so it was incredibly difficult for me. And so sometimes, yeah, I'm thank you for that feedback, because it does feel like that sometimes where I'm like, I don't like, people are like, oh, okay, that's it. I'm like, no, but that was so powerful for me. And that's going to be powerful for someone else. And that's something that even over this past year, I've come to like realize like, I don't have to make it seem harder, because even
Yeah.
for me, like you were saying, when I was going to a lot of different experiences and events, and the beginning of when I started learning about more about personal development and different things like that, it was like overwhelming all the things I thought I had to do. And so then I was even more burnt out.
Yeah.
because I was like keeping this checklist. And so I'm like, no, like what was really the it for me, you know? And so again, yeah,
Hmm.
just that was a long thank you for reflecting that back to me.
You're so welcome. Yeah, that's so
Yeah.
relatable because, like, when we're conditioned to be the good girl, which most people socialized as women are conditioned to be that way, we're used to having those checklists of, like, I need to do this, this, and this to gain approval, to gain love. And
Mhm.
yeah, it's a very interesting paradox that, like, if we want to create a life that we are actually love and where we're self-expressed, the like action steps we need to do are very
Mm.
simple yet very
Mhm.
difficult at the same time.
Yeah. Right? Like you say it out loud and it sounds like, "Oh, that's too easy." And then you're like, "But it's not."
Yeah.
It's really hard.
Yeah, like even when you mentioned earlier, like sitting for 5 minutes without your phone, like that sounds easy, but that can be really hard. You can start to notice yourself being like, oh, I want to check Instagram. Like, oh, I want to check this. Like that's difficult to it's a difficult habit to break.
Oh yeah, for sure. That's something I still have to so consciously do too, because I'm like, I'll put my phone down and then I'm like, a minute later I want to check it and I'm like, why am I trying to check my phone right
Instinctively
now?
go to certain apps. Yeah, I feel you.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I
It's made
currently
for
have,
that.
yeah, right? It was designed to be that way.
Yeah.
It's a little like dopamine box.
For real. You seriously have to be so like careful. Okay, like how much time am I going to spend today on my phone? Because it can
Yeah.
make it go by so fast, and you're like, wow, well, I don't know where the day went, but so it's
Yeah.
like I'm totally guilty of doing that on occasion, and so yeah, even still, like it doesn't matter how much you've practiced, how much time you put in, like all the things you do. There are still days where you will go back into those things. So you have to be like,
Yeah.
oh crap, consciously living. What am I doing right now?
Yeah. Yeah. And it's important to also not shame yourself when you do that
Mm,
because that just,
yes.
that doesn't help.
No, it doesn't. It just eggs it on. Like, it's like,
Yeah.
okay, well, you're shaming me anyway, so may as well keep doing it because I'm already doing it and you're already mad at me for doing it. It's
Yeah.
like this whole process.
Exactly. Yeah. I currently have Instagram deleted on my phone and it's really nice.
Smart.
I'm
I
enjoying
feel like,
this tiny break.
yeah. I'm like, that's why I look forward to hiring a business manager, social media business manager, because then I
Yeah.
feel like I'll just be like, "Okay, cool, take over. Like, you got
Yes.
this."
Yeah. I know this is kind of off topic, but I want one for TikTok because I'm not on TikTok because
Oh,
when I first I used to have it and there was a day where literally spent 5 consecutive hours on that app that I was
wow.
like as soon as I realized that I was like I'm deleting this right now and
Yeah.
I not only deleted the app, I deleted my account on the app so I don't exist on TikTok anymore even though I had content up there. And I'm like, one day I'll just hire a Gen Zer to do it for me because they're
You're
the
like, "Yes."
experts on TikTok.
You're like, "You're good at this. You do it for me. Here's my stuff." Like, go
Yeah,
for it.
yeah,
Exactly. It's crazy how much time. But yeah, I love, yes, totally echo that sentiment of, yeah, not shaming for it. It happens. We all do it. So
yeah,
just, yeah,
yeah.
being more aware.
So I have some questions that I like to ask everyone at the end.
Mhm.
And before we get into that, though, is there any, I guess, like closing thought that you want to add about rituals, pleasure, sensuality? Things also might
Hmm.
come through with the questions I ask, but just in
Yeah.
case, I wanted to check in.
Yeah. No, I think just kind of bringing it all together again, just setting that time aside for yourself every day, allowing those pieces of you to come through, and doing it in a way where You're not putting yourself in a position where like now your nervous system is just so overwhelmed with what's coming up. Just like let little bits out at a time and just love on them and
Yeah.
maybe let yourself express them just a little bit more each time and just see what that does for you. And it doesn't have to be a whole shebang like, oh, now everything's out. It's like, no, move at your own pace. There's no expectation. There's no goal to get to. Just let yourself feel good every day in one way or another.
I love that. Okay, so the first question is, what does self-love mean to you?
Oh yeah, I think that's kind of
I know,
that
as
kind
soon
of
as you started talking, I was like, I should have just asked her the question.
I think the same thing. Self-love means to me it like I guess I'll maybe give a more particular or like a specific thing. 'Cause I think sometimes when people are like, oh yeah, self-love, it's do this, like take yourself out to dinner, go to the spa, or like do these things, which is also a very beautiful way to express love to yourself. And you don't have to go spend a bunch of money to express love to yourself. Self-love could be sitting outside gazing at the stars because you love to do it. Could be reading your favorite book. Putting that time in your calendar to spend time with yourself. um, Talking to a friend that you love, that you feel so uplifted with and have beautiful conversations with. Like, what just makes you feel good? Do
Yeah,
that.
I love that. I feel like I say I love that a lot.
I
Like,
do
let me
that
not.
too. So you speak my language.
Okay, cool. So the next question is, what makes you feel the most grounded?
For me, I feel like anything I'm doing where there's grass or mountains, um, my absolute favorite place to be grounded is sitting by like babbling creeks,
Mm,
like just cute little waters that just like it has that beautiful water sound
I can hear
and
it.
sitting in the mountains. Yeah. And like if there's grass next to it, perfect. Like grassy, bubbly, babbling creek in the mountains. That's like my zone. I love doing that. That grounds me like crazy. But if you don't have that, obviously, like going outside and standing or sitting on my grass, that's also very grounding for me.
Hmm. Now you are speaking my language.
Perfect.
So two more questions. The last two are kind of similar. Um, First, what's your favorite part about being a human?
Mm, that is a hard question because there's so many things. First thought that comes to my mind, of course, I love being a mommy. Like,
Oh,
I love getting to be a mommy. Like, that is like my whole heart. Being able to raise these amazing little humans. And on top of that, like in that sphere, being able to show them things in the world and see their awe. And like it reminds me, like, like I'm just like so in awe of the beauty in the world.
yeah,
So those two combined are my favorite parts of being a human.
that's so beautiful.
Yeah.
You're like experiencing the world through their eyes almost.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Experiencing it through their eyes, experiencing it together, it's just, there's nothing like it to me. It's just amazing. Yeah.
yeah. And what is your favorite part about being a woman?
Hmm. Oh man. I mean, oh woman. Ooh, that is a hard one too. There's just, I mean, obviously, I am definitely an optimist. Um, Again, I think being able to birth children, one of the most incredible experiences in the world. Um, and I would say just how naturally and innately like sensual it is to be a woman.
Mm,
Like there's so much sensuality in being a woman.
Mm.
that is just so yummy. I'm just like, yeah. So those two.
Yeah. I love how you tied that back in with our topic.
Yeah. I mean,
And
obviously I
it's
love it
true.
because I talk about it.
Yeah. Yeah. So, for everyone that tuned in that are curious to connect with you, work with you, where can they find you and learn more about you?
Yeah, so I'm on Instagram at Amber K, AMBERKAY underscore relationship alchemist. And I also have a website, www.
Cool. We'll put that in the show notes.
Awesome.
This was such a beautiful conversation.
Yes, I loved it. It's
Yeah.
so nice.
Yeah. Thanks so much.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
I'm going to stop the recording.